In this lesson, I want to show you how to expose the parameters of your material and use it in other substance-compatible softwares like 3D Studio Max, like Substance Painter, Maya, and other softwares like that support substance materials. As I mentioned before, one of the powerful aspects of Substance Designer is to create procedural materials that you can parameterize your substance, giving the Substance engine direct real-time access to elements. For doing that, you must expose your materials, expose the parameters of your materials, or use some new custom inputs for your material. And I want to show you how to do that in this lesson through a tutorial. But before starting our work, I want to go to Substance Painter and show you one example for a procedural material. Here we are in Substance Painter, and as you see in my shelf I have some materials, and for my example I have chosen this wood American cherry. As you see, if I use it in my mesh, you see I have some parameters in properties field of my material that can change. For example, I can change the wood color, roughness, fibers, and layers, and if I change these parameters, the changes is seen in my mesh too. And this is a procedural materials, and let's imagine someone have created this wood American cherry in Substance Designer. After he created this material, he exposed some parameters like wood color, wood roughness, fibers, and layers, so that I can or he can use it in other software, for example Substance Painter. So I can use the wood color, roughness, fibers, and layers as a variable and change them whenever I want to change. And this is exposing or creating an input means. And for our tutorial, I want to show you how to create a simple wood and expose some parameters for that, like these parameters, for example wood color, roughness, and other things. Alright, let's go back to Substance Designer and start our work by going to File, New Substance, and in New Substance Graph I select physically based metallic roughness material with the name, for example, Wood Lesson 05, and I leave the size mode to relative to parent and width and height and 512 and click on OK so that I can have my graph. For start my work, I want two colors for my wood, so I need two uniform colors. I press space and search for uniform color, and here I have an atomic node of uniform color, which I change the color of that to something like, for example, brown, something like that. And I want a copy of this layer, so I will Ctrl C and Ctrl V on this node and select this node to change its parameters and make the color a little bit brighter. And as you see, I have two colors, one is darker and the other is lighter, and I want to combine them by a blend node. So I use one of them in foreground and the other in background, and for the opacity input I use a generator custom node. So I will search the generators to find a good custom node that I think directional noise is one is good. So I will drag and drop this custom node in the graph editor and use it as an opacity of my work. And as you see, I have this nice pattern for my wood, but I need another color for this wood. I want to make it a little bit complicated, so I want to combine another uniform color with this blend. So I use another blend for my work, and I copy this node, Ctrl C and Ctrl V, and use it as my foreground, or you can use it as your background, it depends on you, and make this color a little bit darker, excuse me. I made it a little bit darker, and I want another opacity custom node for my input. So I will select directional noise 3, and I use it for my opacity input, and I have something like that. As you see, the the effect of dark brown uniform color is too much, and I want to decrease the effect of that. For doing that, I will add a levels node between the directional noise tree and the opacity input. So I will select this link and give it a levels node. And I double clicked on the last blend I have so that I can see the effect of the blend in my 2D view. And I one clicked on the level so that I can access to the parameters of the levels to change, because I want to change the parameters of the levels, and I can see the effect of changing the parameters of the levels on my final blend node at once. So now I can do that. Let me change the histogram a little bit. I think this is all right. Okay, good. A little bit change to color made it better, make it better. So let's change this color a little bit brighter, and let's change this color again. All right. And let's change the resolution from 512 to something like 2K to see the details more better. For doing that, you can double click on an empty space and change the output size, but as I mentioned before, it's better not to do this work and not to change this 0. It's better to change the pattern the file size in Substance Designer by going to pattern size here and changing its value to something like, for example, 2K, and I have more details in my maps. Alright, good. Now it's time to link this last blend to my base color input. Alright, I have the wood, but this wood material needs some normal map. So for the normal map, I use a normal node because I want to use this blend for my normal map, but for using this I must link this to the normal node. But there is one problem here. The normal node input must be a grayscale one, but this is a color node. To change this color node to a grayscale one, we need another node called grayscale conversion. So I will change, select the grayscale conversion and link this to the grayscale conversion, and link the output of grayscale conversion to input of my normal, and again link the output of normal to the input of my last normal output here. And I have something like that, and you can see the effect of normal in my 3D view. As you see, let me change the direction of lights. See that? All right. And I can even change the intensity of your normal by clicking on the normal node and change the intensity of that, but I leave it on 1 because it's good, I think. The other thing I want is the roughness map. I want to use this grayscale node, grayscale conversion node, as my roughness. So I will link this to roughness too. And I have a better effect for my roughness, but it's better to invert this node before linking that to roughness. So I will select this link and select the invert grayscale here. Alright, it's now better, but as you see, the wood is too rough, and for controlling the roughness of the wood I need another node. So after inverting my grayscale conversion, I will add a histogram range to this link so that I can control my amount of roughness. So let's add a histogram range. There we go, and let's select the histogram range and change the range to 1. And by the position, I can control the amount of roughness in my wood. As you see, I have a less rough wood, it's very shiny, and if I change the position towards more values, I have a very rough wood. And this is a good parameters to control the amount of roughness. Alright, it's awesome. I don't want metallic for my wood. I can delete this output, or I can give it a uniform color to that. So I will give it a uniform black color to this. And the other one is the height map. For if I want to use the height map, I think it's I can use my normal map for the height, but for using that I need a node. So I will search for the normal to height node. Let's find the normal to height, and here I have a normal to height. Let's link the normal to the to this node, and let's link the output of this node to the height output here, and this is the height. Another thing we must do is, as I mentioned before, to change the resolution of uniform colors, because I want to have a more optimized material. So I need to select the uniform colors and change the form of output size to from relative to parent to absolute. So I will make them absolute, and then I will set the resolution to something like 32 by 32, and again I do that with this one, change it to 32 by 32, and as you see, my blend type of size changes to relative to input. So I must select that and change that to relative to parent again, and I must select this uniform color and change it to absolute, and again 32 by 32 resolution, and select this one and check if it's not relative to input and make it relative to parent. Again, let's do that with this one. I make it absolute and 32 by 32. As you see, the metallic resolution changes, and I showed you how to solve this problem, because we haven't any output size for my final output in the graph. I showed you how to solve this problem in the previous lesson, but in this lesson I want to change that, because I don't need metallic maps. So I don't need to make it, for example, 2K by 2K, and let it as it is, and everything is okay now. All right. You can save your work. Let's save our work. Let's click on the unsaved package and save our work. For example, I save it with the name wood underline lesson 05 and clicked on the save so that I can save my graph. Alright, my simple wood material is now created, and it's time to go to the main part of this lesson and create some input parameters so that I can use them as a tweak in compatible softwares. For creating input, I can either create my own input in my graph, or transform existing parameters into an input by exposing them in a node. And here I want to show you how to expose a parameter in a node and use it as an input. For doing that, first, one of the way of exposing parameters is select the node you want to expose the parameters of that. For example, I want to expose the first color, the first uniform color. So I will select my uniform color here, and now I have its parameters here now, and I want to expose this output color. For doing that, I will click on this button, and I have an expose option. If I click on that, expose parameter window appears, and I can set a name for my expose parameter, or I can use its default name, that is output color, for that. But if I don't want this default name, I can change that by clicking on the new and create your own name. So for example, I will give it a first underline color for this node and clicked on the OK. And if I clicked OK, you see I have no more output color in the node specific parameters, and I can change them, change it in a specific parameters of this node, because I have the output color of this node as an input for my main graph settings, and I can access it by double clicking on an empty space in graph editor. And as you see, I have the parameters of my graph, and one is input parameters, and if I clicked on that, I have this tweak here, the first color, and as you see, I can access the color of that through this this input parameter. Alright, and this is one way of exposing parameters, and if and you can fairly expose all the parameters in a specific parameters or instance parameters part of a node. But there are some Exception. For example, you cannot expose the color mode, a color mode. You cannot expose that. Or you cannot expose a histogram in the levels node. For example, if I clicked on the level, I cannot expose this histogram. Let's remove that. And I cannot, for example, expose the gradient color here in the gradient map node. And these are the exceptions, but they are not too much, they are few, and we can expose fairly all the other parameters in a specific parameter or custom parameters of a node. And let's see, for example, here in my node I have several parameters that I can expose, and if I want to expose several parameters at once, one way is to right click on the node I want to expose several parameters of that and select the expose parameters, and I have exposed node parameters window appeared here, and I see the list of the parameters I can expose and use them as tweaks. And here if I check them, I can expose, for example, these three parameters. The name of these parameters will be, for example, scale, angle random, and I can give some prefix and suffix to that. For example, I will give it my underline scale, angle, and other things like that. And the other thing is I can change its name in the input parameters if I want, and there is nothing to be worried about the name of that. You can change it whenever you want, or you can create your own group for the parameters you are exposing in this place. Let's cancel that. And the other way to exposing several parameters, multiple parameters of a node, is to select a node and go to the instance parameters, and in the up right side of instance parameters, this button, if you click that, you can click expose parameters and you have access to this window again. Alright, let's cancel that. And let's expose some other parameters, let's expose some other parameters. For example, I want to expose a parameter so that I can control the amount of roughness in my wood. For doing that, I create a histogram range when I was working, and I said by this histogram range I can control the amount of roughness by the position parameters. If I change the position towards 0, I have less rough and more shiny material. If I move it towards higher value, I have a rough material for that. So I will expose this position, and let's click on that and click on the expose. The position, it's a default name of Substance Designer. I want another name. I call it roughness, and clicked on OK. Alright, I have exposed that. Another parameter I want to expose is the intensity of the normal map, so that I can control the intensity of the normal whenever I want. So I will click on this normal node, and I must expose the intensity of that. So I will expose this, and I called it normal intensity, and click on OK. Alright, I think it's enough for my material, and it's time to double click on an empty space to go to the input parameters of my graph. As you see, I have the first color, I have the roughness, and I have the normal intensity as my inputs. And there are some parameters I want to explain. For example, if you see this roughness, or the position name label position here, I have some parameters here that I want to describe them. For example, the identifier shows the name of the tweak that Substance Designer is using. And the type of the tweaks, we have 9 type for our tweaks, as you see, and my roughness is float 1, and the type of them is very important to create some functions, to create some custom inputs, and it's very important. And as you see, my roughness has the type of float 1, and the editor defines the kind of the widget that will be used for the tweak, and depends on the type of the tweak. For example, if I'm using the float 1, I have 3 kind of widget. One is the slider, the other is angle, and I can use a color grayscale widget for controlling my roughness, as you see that. And if you change, for example, this color, you can control the amount of roughness. This is the form of editor when I use the color grayscale widget, and I can use the color grayscale. I can control the roughness by a slider form widget, and I think it's okay for this one. All right, this was the editor, and description is you can create your own description that will be used as a tooltip in your compatible software. For example, if I want to have a description that is used in another software, I can have, for example, for controlling roughness. And this will be my tooltip of this parameter. And the label is the name of the tweak for other substance compatible softwares. As you see, the label is position, and I can see the name position here. I use roughness for my identifier, and in substance roughness is used. But if I export this material and use it in 3D Studio Max, I have this tweak with the label of position. So if I want to have this tweak with the name of roughness in other software, I must change the name of that. For example, I want the name of roughness to be used in other softwares. Roughness and group, I will explain you later. It's for having a better visualization of your tweaks. You can use groups. And the default is the default parameters you have for your tweak when you exposing your parameters and you use your parameters. You can change the default parameters, and when you load this material in another software, it has, for example, the default value of 0.15. And the minimum value is the minimum value a user can use for this parameters, for the roughness parameter, and it cannot set in lower value than this minimum value. For example, here is 0, and the maximum value shows the maximum value for this tweak. And the clamp, if the clamp is true, if it's set to true, the user won't be able to enter values beyond what has been defined. Okay? And the user data can be used to pass additional values, and by the visible if, you can have some conditions so that your parameters be visible or not. These are all the things you can find, for example, in a tweak in the parameters. And this was the meaning of each of these options here. Alright, the other thing I want to show you is the first color I exposed my parameters. Let me show you. If I change my first color, just one of my color of this wood will be changed. And if I want other colors to change, I must expose them separately, and I will have 3 kind of colors, and changing them to have a good material can be very difficult. and it's better to have one color, for example, one uniform color, and if you change this uniform color, all the other colors change proportional to uniform color. For doing that, let me show you a trick. For doing that, you need some levels. Let me add some levels node. Here I have a levels node, and let's link it to the levels and change the histogram so that I can have a color like this uniform color. So I will change the histogram. Good. All right. It's near of this, and it's like that. And I can delete this uniform color and link these levels to the background color of my blend. And I want another level node, so let's add another levels node. Here we add a levels node and link it again to this levels node, and this time I want to have a similar color with this uniform color. So I will change the histogram of this level, and as you see, if I change the histogram, I have something like that. I will delete this uniform color, and I will give these levels to this blend, and I have one uniform color, and if I change this one uniform color, all the other colors or the other two colors will be changed proportional to this color. Let me show you now. If I change my first color here, the other color will change proportional to that. Let me change another color. Do you see that? It's awesome. And it's very easy to control the colors of, for example, a wood. Alright, let's set it on one color, for example, something like that. And let's change the identifier to color or wood color. And I want to give the label it's the same name. Alright, I don't want any description. I want to have a group for my colors so that I can have all my colors in a group called colors, as you see. And I want another group for all my parameters that can be controlled by numbers. So I will call a group called parameters for number-based tweaks, and I will copy this name and give it to that name. I will call this identifier and use it on the label again. Alright, good. And the other thing I want to show you is, let me select directional noise. I have a scale parameter here that is set to 1. If I change the scale, you see the scale of my directional noises will changes, and you can effect of that in your material. And I have another directional noise that I want the same parameter again, scale. Alright, now I want to have these scales as an input, but I don't want to expose them separately, because if I expose this scale and then expose this one, I will have two scale parameters, and I don't want to have two scales. I want to just have one parameter that controls the scale of these parameters. For example, I want to create parameters called noise scale. And if I change the noise scale from, for example, from the 1 to 2, the scale of directional noise and directional noise tree changes from 1 to 2 at once. and it cannot be possible by exposing them separately. So I need to create my own custom input in my graph. So I will double click on the empty space in the graph so that I can access my parameters of the graph, and I want to create my own input parameters. So for adding your own custom input parameters, you will click on this plus button, add new input tweak, and let's click on that. Now I have an input tweak here. I will give the identifier, for example, noise scale, and I copied it so that the label has the same name with the identifier. All right. I want this noise scale controls the parameters of the scale of this directional noise 1 and directional noise 3. And as you see the type of these scales, these are integer numbers. As you see, they are not float, they are integers, 1, 2, 3. So I have integer numbers for scales. The type of them are integers, so I will double click again and go to my noise scale tweak and change the type of my tweak to integer. And because it's just one number, I have one number for the scale, I will select integer 1. All right. And I want to I can have a drop down list or a slider for my work. I want to use a slider for my widget of this type. I don't want a description. All right, it's good. And I want this noise scale to be in parameters group. So I will again copy the group name and paste it in here. Okay. The default number is 1. I want the minimum number be 1. The minimum scale can be 1. And the maximum scale 10 is enough, I think. And you can change much numbers. And don't see this slider. And you can set it on higher values. For example, if you set it on 20, you have more space and you can change it to higher values again. And you can set more values than 40 again. But I think 20 is enough for that. Okay. And alright, it's good for these tweak parameters. And now it's time to link the scale parameters of directional noise 1 and 3 to the noise scale tweak I created here. For doing that, we must use functions. Functions allow you to generate results using the logic you would otherwise find in programming language. But rather than using the lines of code, we have the same nodal forms here. Alright, for creating functions, you can click on the node you want to create function for that, and you must find the parameters you want to create function for this, and click here and click on empty function. Alright, now I have a function for my scale and as you see, I don't have access to my scale and it's some kind like exposing in other words, I can say exposing is some kind of creating functions. When you expose something, you create a function contains a get float that catches the values of a newly created variables. Alright, now I have, after doing that, I must go to the function graph. For doing that, I will click on this button. Now I have the function graph of my scale here. And as you see, the function graph is very similar to the main graph editor. And you have the same nodal forms here. But the forms and the kind of nodes in function graph differs from the nodes you use in a graph editor. You cannot use for example, use the atomic nodes here. You cannot use these custom nodes here. You must use function nodes. All right. Okay, now it's time to catch the number I created for my variable as scale noise. So here I will click on the space and I will search for get integer. I had an integer for my noise scale type, so I will get integer, and if I click that, I can select my variable I created in my graph inputs. So I will click on noise scale. Now my scale gets my newly created variable in my graph. And for making them work, I must right click on that and click as set as output node. Alright. Now it will work fine. So let me let me see that. Let's go to noise scale and change the default value from 1 to 2, and as you see the scale will changes. See that? But this scale doesn't change, excuse me. So I must create another function for this one, and for doing that I will select this node. In the scale I will click on empty function and click on that to go to the function page of that, and again with the same process I get the integer value of that and clicked on so that I can get the integer value of my noise scale variable in the graph, and set is at output node. Alright, now if let's double click on that. If I clicked here on the noise scale and change my default parameters, for example, you can see the scale of directional noise 1 and 3 changes at once with just one tweak. Alright. Okay, now my material is created and my inputs are created too. And in the right side of input parameters, upper right side, I have an option called switch to preview mode. If I click that, I can see the preview of my input parameters that I can see in other software. For example, as you see, I have a group called colors, and if I clicked on that, I will have the colors I can change. For example, I can change the wood color, and if I change that, the wood color will change too. And I have another group called parameters, and if I change the parameter, clicked on that, I will see the roughness, normal intensity, and noise scale here, and I can change the amount of roughness, and I can change the normal intensity as you see, and I can change the noise scale. See that? Okay, let's save this. As you see, I have the wood lesson 5.sps, and I have a star form above that. It means I need to resave my work because it needs some updates, and I have changed my graph from my last save. So I need to save it again. And as you see, the graph changes and the font will be changed from the italic to regular forms. Alright, it's enough for this lesson, and in the next lesson I will show you how to export and package your material and use it in other software, for example using it in 3D Studio Max or using it in Substance Painter. I will show you how to use them in the next lesson. And if I click on OK, as you see, I have my wood lesson 05 material in my shelf. In the base, in my materials part, and you can use it in your project. For example, I want to use it in the body of my model, so I will drag and drop it in the body of my model here, as you see. And if I select my material, I will have access to the properties of my material, and we have some properties, and one of the properties you have in your material is parameters group, which consists of two more groups. One is colors and the other is parameters, which are the groups we made in previous lesson. If I clicked on the colors, we will access to the wood color we exposed, so we can change the wood color to the color we want. If I go to texture set setting and see my channels, I don't have those channels in this system. I have base color, roughness, and metallic, which are not compatible with this system. So I need some channels which are compatible, and for doing that I will add some channels like diffuse and another thing is specular, and another thing is glossiness. Another thing I want to draw your attention is the substance procedural base color map, as you see, and if I compare it to the substance designer base color, I see the base color in my 3D Studio Max is some kind washed out, because when I loaded my substance map in 3D Studio Max, a 2.2 gamma is multiplied by that, and I must remove the effect of this gamma.